With a starting price of $28,595, the 2027 Bolt is the least expensive electric car in the US right now. But more importantly, it's no longer a penalty box EV in ways that the first generation certainly was. The interior is more comfortable and more premium, and uses the latest GM tech borrowed from the Blazer and the Equinox EV. We get the latest version of Super Cruise, in fact something that we don't even find in any other GM model currently. Importantly though, this does something that the first generation Bolt couldn't do: road trip, because this will charge from 10% to 80% in just 25 minutes, something that took the old Bolt more than an hour to accomplish. So this might just be the affordable EV you've been waiting for. If it is though, act fast, because according to Chevy, it might not stick around very long. To get to that low base price, obviously Chevy reused a decent portion of the previous generation Bolt, specifically the Bolt EUV. But they gave it a reskin so it looks different on the front, and again, importantly, that new interior. But a lot of the hard points have not changed. So if you didn't find the Bolt EUV particularly roomy, this is probably not going to change your mind. And obviously the size of the Bolt is one of the ways they get to its low sticker price. But the front end feels right in line with the rest of the modern Chevy lineup. We get the divorced headlight arrangement that we find in a lot of their models with the LED DRL on top, tiny little bow tie right there, and we even have a 360-degree camera system in this model. We all know that one of the ways to reduce the price tag of a vehicle is to reduce the size of the vehicle. So logically, this is the smallest entry in GM's electric vehicle lineup, mostly related to the previous generation Bolt EUV, but also a touch of Blazer and Equinox is going on under the hood. Dimensionally though, that's exactly Bolt EUV, just fractions of an inch off. 169.6 inches from tip to tail, riding on a 105.3-inch wheelbase. If you're still rocking a first-generation Bolt without the EUV, then we get an important 6-inch stretch right back here. A lot of that goes to the rear passenger area, but some of it goes to cargo practicality, not necessarily cargo volume. The story of the Bolt is really a story of efficiency, not just volumetric efficiency or parking lot efficiency, because you can jam this in a compact space really easily, but also resource efficiency. It simply takes less battery to get this down the road 260 miles versus a bigger EV in GM's lineup. So fewer resources are used, and importantly, higher energy efficiency. Part of that is, of course, thanks to these relatively tiny tires at 215 width, 17-inch wheels right there, but those are also going to cost you less to replace, so certainly some cash resource efficiency going on there too. Love it or hate it, the rear end is definitely more conventionally styled than the first generation Bolt. I always kind of like those squiggly LED taillights, mind you. We get an aero spoiler on top, more cameras going on there. Rear windshield wiper, the release for the hatch is here, and you'll notice that we don't have repeater lights under the hatch because the hatch doesn't stretch and wrap around the side, so they have lights just on the outside, helping reduce costs and of course longer-term maintenance costs as well. This may sound counterintuitive, but another cost-saving measure was to completely replace the drivetrain in the Bolt. Batteries, inverters, motors, chargers, etc. Everything is brand new. Well, brand new to the Bolt, because the motor has been borrowed out of, you guessed it, the rest of the Ultium front-wheel drive lineup. 210 horsepower on the front axle only. If you want all-wheel drive, you'll have to get an Equinox. The charger, it's the same 11.5 kilowatt AC charger that we find in the rest of GM's lineup, meaning it will take this 65 kilowatt hour battery from 0 to completely full in just over 5 hours. That's a really short charge window, given that that is going to give you 262 miles of electric range. You'll notice if we look at a Nissan Leaf, there's an interesting comparison. The Leaf theoretically is rated for 259 to 303 miles of range, depending on the version you get. Now, mind you, the base Leaf, apparently it's been postponed indefinitely, so we don't know exactly or if we will ever get that in the United States. But there's another consideration. This uses a newer LFP pack, not an NMC pack like we find in the Leaf. And that means it's safe to charge this battery to 100% on a more regular basis. In fact, Chevy actually recommends that you charge this battery pack to 100% in order to help keep the cells equalized. In the Leaf, you're only supposed to charge it to 80% on a daily basis. And 80% in that 303-mile model only gives you 242 miles of range. So if you follow the instructions, this is actually going to give you more range than that 303-mile range Leaf. And then importantly, we have the DC fast charge speeds, which are basically the same as the Leaf, 150 kilowatts peak. That's a far cry from the last time we saw a Bolt in the United States, meaning this will go 10% to 80% in 25 minutes. That is 10 minutes faster than the Leaf because the Leaf has a bigger battery pack. So it simply takes more energy to fill that pack to completely full. Although again, when it is full, it's going to get you an important 40 extra miles of range. If you do a lot of road tripping, you know, the Leaf might be worth doing it. Just don't do too much road tripping because you're not supposed to do it that often. And unlike our Blazer EV, which we're still going to have for another few months, they've made charging at supercharger stops a little bit easier because the infotainment system will not only route you to superchargers, it will tell you which charging stalls are available, and it will let you start the charge from the infotainment screen once everything has been set up. You simply press the button, hop out, plug your car in. By the time you get back in, charging has already started. And Chevy has vowed to make it even simpler in the future via an over-the-air update. They claim that true plug-and-charge charging is going to come to this very soon, so you'll just be able to roll up and plug right in. Although you're probably going to want to add that destination anyway, so that way the vehicle can start preconditioning the battery for optimum charging. I also really appreciate that, like many EVs lately, this display will now tell you how much power the car is capable of accepting and how much it's asking for versus what the station is delivering, because that can really help you in situations where for some reason it's charging slow and you're thinking, my goodness, it's the car. Maybe it's not. Maybe you just need to move to the stall next door. Maybe something's wrong with that particular plug and you'll go back up to the stated charge speed. In our testing, we were able to go from 17% charge to 80% charge in about 20 minutes. So right on the nose for their expectations. If you weren't a fan of the seats or the seating position in the old Bolt, this is probably not going to change your mind. But I do appreciate the upright seating position and the fact that headroom is very generous, even with the power moonroof. I can raise the driver's seat up pretty darn high and get a lot of extra room in the back for passengers in the rear. We also get a tilt telescopic steering column with an okay range of motion. It's nothing to write home about, but it does help you get in that really upright seating position if that's what you're interested in. Now, the driver's seat, it's manual in the base model, and the passenger seat is always manual. If you want the power seat, you can add that for $995 to the base model, and I probably would because it is a lot more comfortable in my experience than the passenger seat that we find here. Compared to a lot of subcompact vehicles, the back seats in the Bolt are especially high off the ground, which makes the seating position a little bit unexpected for some because the seat bottom cushion is not exactly as high off the floor as it is off the ground. Remember, the battery has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is right there under my feet. And interestingly, the floorboards here are not as low as the ones up front, so we definitely have a stadium seating vibe here. That means that for me at 6 feet tall, I'm mostly looking at that pillar there, and my head is definitely right there in line with the roofline. But I have a surprising amount of usable legroom. We do need to talk legroom. Remember how legroom is measured. On the charts, this is 83 inches of combined legroom, and, you know, if I measure it out, it seems like it's around there somewhere, but that's ankle point to hip point, and when you have a really upright vehicle like this, it can be a little skewed as far as the way they're measuring the room. GM also does this thing where they say max front legroom, so that's legroom measured with the front seat all the way back, and then the rear seat legroom is with that measured way up front, so keep that part in mind. However, if you are shorter than I am, you probably could fit a rear-facing child seat back here if you wanted to, because I measured an important 28 inches from seat back to seat back with that front seat adjusted for me, and that's about the minimum for those child seats, so that's pretty reasonable. The downside, obviously, is the width of the rear bench. It's really quite narrow, and you're really going to notice the roof line here and the doors and the fact that the center seat is really quite small as well. So if you have a child seat back here, you're really limiting yourself to 2 people in the back. And if we're talking hauling adults, it's really just 2 people as well. On the other hand, Chevy gives us a shoulder belt that comes out of the seat back itself, not out of the ceiling. So for putting those child seats in the middle, that is an appreciated feature. But when I measured out the distance between these buckles, I suspect that a lot of child seats would actually prevent the use of both outboard seats, really, because they'd be a lot wider than that center seat position. Behind the rear seats, obviously, we don't find nearly as much cargo room as we find in the Equinox or the Blazer. This 22-inch roller bag, for instance, cannot fit in that position and have the hatch closed, and it's best not to even try because this corner is metal and really sharp and it would probably pop the glass. But you can line them up across the rear like that, and then you could squeeze 2, maybe 3 22-inch roller bags and some additional luggage right under it. For those interested in road tripping, you're probably going to want to leave this load floor at home because check out how enormous this storage area is. You could fit a spare tire in here, or you could actually put two 22-inch roller bags completely under that floor. Also, importantly, if that floor is not in place, guess what? You can put the 22-inch roller bags across the rear in that position, absolutely no problem. In fact, you could put 24-inch roller bags back here. And the last time we tested a Bolt EUV, we were able to squeeze 3 24-inch roller bags in the back. While we're back here, I should mention the dual voltage charge cord, because this is something that we get in every model, a 7.7 kilowatt capable, 240 and 120 volt charge cable. That's optional in a large number of EVs. So if you don't need to charge this as fast as possible, you'll be just fine with the one included. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end RS trim, although you will find a lot of this at least available in the base trim. We have the rear view camera, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but it's a nice touch if you have your car fully loaded. Up here we have the controls for the optional power moonroof. We have slide to the side sun visors, and the power moonroof not only has powered glass, it has a powered shade as well. It's not the biggest moonroof, as you can see. It goes to, I don't know, just about the second row passenger's knees, but it does add some light into the interior, and I do appreciate the lighter headliner color in this model as well. The front pane that opens is also pretty average as far as window size, so they don't give you a shrunken front panel like we see in some pano roofs that are on the small side. Over here we have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. You can see we have RS embossed on those head restraints. This is a two-way adjustable head restraint with that push button right there on the side. We have upholstery that is perforated because we have heated and ventilated seats. This is imitation leather, not real leather in this model, but we have the accented red stitching right there. And then moving over to the doors, we find similar styles and looks to what we found in the Bolt EUV, but with new textures and new trims. I really like this very Volvo looking, at least that's what it gives me impressions of, diagonal hatch texture here on the door. That's all a hard plastic, of course. This is all a hard plastic, so is what's above. Really, the armrest is the only softer touch material, and it's not the softest. It's kind of a medium hard rubbery plastic right there. Now, I did notice that some of these trim components are already showing some fine scratches where the darker plastic bits generally wouldn't, so keep that in mind with those textures. Now down there, the lighting's a little difficult here, sorry about that, but down there we have a speaker grill. We also have bottle holders, and then we have a lot of storage going on the dashboard. I really appreciate this touch because we have the big bin above, we have the big middle bin, and unlike some of Toyota's recent EVs and Subarus as well, we actually have a glove compartment here, something that you won't find in the similarly, well, almost as inexpensive Subaru Uncharted. The upper section of the dashboard, that's really quite a hard plastic as well, but we have, again, some extra texture, so kind of a golf ball thing going on in that middle zone, and then the divider between those two areas, and I appreciate the lighter colored plastics. Now here in the middle of everything, we have an infotainment screen that is tilted just a little bit too much for my tastes in the vertical direction. I really noticed that in strong sunlight, I got a lot of glare and a lot of reflection from that screen. Of course, if I move the camera up here, maybe it's a little bit easier to see everything, but you wouldn't be looking at it this way unless you were looking through the moonroof. Now, the other thing you're going to notice is that this is running the latest Google operating system from the Blazer and the Equinox, which means we have Chrome, we have YouTube, we have Amazon Music, Spotify, HBO Max, Google News, Prime Video, Apple Music, but no CarPlay and no Android Auto either. I am not the biggest fan of this limitation because GM has one of the best implementations of CarPlay around and Android Auto as well. So the fact that they're not giving you the freedom to choose the interface that you would like to use in the car just, I don't know, still sticks in my craw for some reason. As with most modern EVs, you'll notice that it's added charging stops, but the big difference between this and the previous Bolt is only 46 minutes of charging, and it definitely has a strong preference for Tesla supercharger stations, which are going to be a bit more reliable. It'll of course tell you what charge you need to get to in order to leave that charging station and give you complete routing information as well. That is really practical, and of course it's going to tie in with the preconditioning mechanism for the battery and all that jazz. I again just wish that we had the option to use some of the different software that GM has done so well with. We have different ambient lighting settings right there. If I go back, we also have drive modes. Everything is really based on this touchscreen as far as the driving interaction, the charging interactions, vehicle status and settings, things like that. But they didn't forget the physical climate control knob, something I again appreciate down here. Single zone automatic climate control though, no dual zone, although we do have ventilated seats up front in this model. Big Qi wireless charging mat right there, kind of a small little spot next to it where you really couldn't stick another smartphone, then another little storage area right there. I really dig the big storage bins at the bottom though, because you can fit kind of a lot of stuff down here, and we have removable dividers so you can slot different things in there. That's a nice long storage area. We then have USB-C inputs here, 12-volt power outlet right there, and then more configurable storage in this area where I have all my knickknacks today. This is the same divider as below, only used to make this area a cup holder arrangement. Then another storage area underneath that center armrest, nice and deep because there's not a lot going on under there, but again, kind of a rubbery, hard material here, not the soft touch materials you find in some vehicles. Over on the driver's side, logically no head-up display given the price tag, but we do get one of those reflected LED arrays for the emergency notifications. And then we have basically the same LCD instrument cluster and very similar software to what we find in the Blazer and the Equinox, but it's a bit less configurable. I noticed that there was no way to turn on a moving map display on that LCD like you can in the others. So that's one little limitation right there. The steering wheel, pretty similar to other GM wheels. We have the distance button there for the cruise control. This one just has adaptive cruise control. We don't have Super Cruise in this particular model because we don't have the bar right there on top, but it is available in both trims. We have buttons over here for the infotainment system. You can see that notification popping up there because volume up, down, and track forward, backward, those are on the back of the steering column. The other thing you'll notice on the back of the steering column are the different stalks. These are borrowed right out of the Blazer and the Equinox, so that's another cost reducing measure, but I think it's actually a good one because these definitely feel nicer than the stalks that were used in the pre-refresh Bolt. If you'd like even more physical controls, there's a dimmer knob over here to the left of the steering wheel, heated steering wheel button, the lane departure warning system, and an electric parking brake release. All right, with the battery charged, it is time to get the Bolt out on the road and unleash 210 horsepower. You will notice that there's not a lot of drama, and that's because the 0 to 60 time is not really any different than the outgoing model. In fact, we actually ran a slower 0 to 60 in this Bolt than the last Bolt EUV that I tested. That one went 0 to 60 in 7 seconds. It took this one 7.2 seconds. On the other hand, our preliminary braking score was definitely better. It was 133 feet last time, definitely long, just 121 feet for this model. So the braking has definitely improved, but logically, the reason the 0 to 60 time hasn't improved is that the strategy with a front-wheel drive EV is basically the same as before. They really limit power on initial throttle applications, especially from a stop. So if I floor it here, I'm getting all 200 horsepower, and I definitely get some wheel slip. But starting from a complete stop, you don't get all 200 ponies right away. And that makes sense because that would overwhelm the wheels. And that's the major reason that all-wheel drive EVs like Chevy's own Equinox EV or Blazer EV are going to be significantly faster than this, even if we're talking about the first generation of those all-wheel drive vehicles where they only had 70 extra horsepower. That 70 extra horsepower makes a big difference when it comes to the 0 to 60 time. The ramp up should be relatively obvious from this stop sign. I have the traction control off. Let's see what happens. Floor it. No drama, just the barest hint of wheel slip there. And let's go ahead and do that again from a stop so we can talk about where the power comes on. So, judging by this power gauge, just off the cuff here, floor it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. Full power happens right around 32 miles an hour or so. And that's really what's going on here. It does appear that passing power has been minorly improved because if I went into the details, bear in mind it has been quite some time since we tested that Bolt EUV, it did appear that the 30 to 60 time was about 0.2 of a second better. So it's a little bit sluggish on the go, but then once you're up and running, it actually has a reasonable amount of power. The good thing though is that even though this is slightly heavier than the last generation Bolt EUV, it actually is not much heavier. This is only about 60 pounds or so heavier than the last Bolt EUV that we tested. And that means it drives basically the same out on the road. That's going to be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you're looking for. This does not drive like a shrunken Equinox. Logically, the Equinox feels bigger and heavier. Not surprising, of course, because it is bigger and heavier. Here's the way that comes across out on the road. The suspension here feels firmer. It's a little bit less comfortable for daily driving. Not uncomfortable, mind you, but it does have a little bit of that small car-like bobblehead feel and just a hint of firm and bouncy like we find in some EVs. I suspect that there's simply not as much suspension motion available in this suspension setup as we find in the Equinox, or of course the Blazer. The Blazer is incredible incredibly comfortable. And the reason that I'm mentioning the Equinox and the Blazer here is that depending on the deal available around you, the Equinox gets almost as inexpensive as the Bolt. There is a reasonable amount of overlap between the two models. On the other hand, if you're looking for something that drives smaller, not exactly like that Mini in front of me, but more along those lines, something smaller, easier to park, a little bit more chuggable out on your favorite winding mountain road, then you probably want something like the Bolt, because this is actually genuinely fun to drive out on these winding mountain roads. And when the slow Mini turns the other way and you can dig deeper on the throttle, you're definitely rewarded by a well-balanced chassis. This is a really solid front-wheel drive platform. Obviously, though, that means it's not going to handle like a Tesla Model 3, one of the closest competitors in terms of price tag to this. But remember, it is a lot more expensive, and obviously we're going to dive into that a bit more in a second. Let's talk, though, about efficiency. In our real-world testing here, I suspect you'd probably get right around that 270-mile range easily on this battery pack. And because this is an LFP pack, you actually will be able to charge it to 100% on a relatively regular basis. In fact, it's recommended for best battery practices for you to charge this battery pack at least occasionally to 100%. And that's so that those cells can all balance out and the software can really give you an accurate range estimation. That is not something that's recommended with the average NMC pack, the kind that's in the Blazer and the Equinox and a lot of other high-performance EVs out there. That's because those batteries tend to degrade faster over 80%. This kind of battery, though, doesn't have that same limitation. We have a longer cycle lifetime, so if you're worried about longevity, another reason you might want to get this, and it has that ability to be charged fully. So unlike many EVs, where you're really only exercising 80% of the range on a daily basis as a recommendation, this, you could exercise more of the range if you really wanted to. If you're that kind of person that wants to leave with the battery completely full, just like you want your gas tank to be completely full in your gasoline car all the time, then you should check out something with an LFP pack. On the other hand, if you want something a bit quieter, you might want to go back to that Equinox because we did measure 64 decibels in here, which makes this one of the louder EVs that we've tested recently. And lastly, a solid reason to get the Bolt over pretty much every other EV out there except for the Teslas is going to be the Super Cruise software that we find available in the Bolt. Now that's a relatively expensive option. Over $6,000 if we're talking about the base model, and depending on exactly what option boxes you've already checked, it's just over $3,500. But that is less expensive than Tesla's full self-driving suite, and a model that is absolutely fully loaded is still actually going to be less expensive than most configurations of the base trim of Model 3. So if you're interested in hands-free highway driving, this is simply the least expensive way to get into that kind of technology in America right now. And this has the latest version of Chevy's Super Cruise software, interestingly debuting on this, which is a different twist than last time, because last time the Bolt, EUV only mind you, got Super Cruise, it actually got a previous generation, an older version of the hardware and software. This time they're not hobbling the Bolt that way, and this is getting the absolute latest hardware and the latest software for expanded capability. If you want to know more about how Super Cruise functions in the Bolt, be sure and check out our quick drive review where I was able to take a very, very brief spin in one of the limited number of Super Cruise equipped Bolts that they had here. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to spend more than about 30 minutes out on the road, but it feels exactly like the rest of the Super Cruise lineup, except that it does more automated lane changing to keep you in the right lane for freeway interchanges, and depending on the format of the freeway interchange, it may actually take the interchange for you and then continue driving on the other highway. But rules and exceptions apply there, of course. Now to the nitty-gritty. How much is the Bolt going to set you back? Well, again, this is the least expensive electric vehicle in the US now. Importantly, that's partially because the base Leaf with the tiny battery and the less powerful motor has been paused indefinitely in the US. If it ever comes, it could undercut the Bolt, but it would be doing so with less power and less range. This at $28,595 gives you by default 262 miles of range, that relatively quick DC fast charge time, the 240 volt charge cable, manual seats up front, and the option to get power seats, ventilated and heated seats as well. You can add the heated seat package for $995. If you want Super Cruise, you have to load that base trim all the way up. It's going to cost $6,600 extra because of the other options you have to select, but it's still going to be under $36,000, $35,665, making this the least expensive way to get hands-free highway driving in North America. That's a big deal because also Super Cruise costs less on an ongoing basis than Tesla's full self-driving package. It doesn't do all the things that FSD can do, mind you, but if you simply want to roll down the highway hands-free, going from one place to the other on interstate whatever, this will do that for you. Also though, it will handle a large number of Texas's farm-to-market roads, those really boring 2-lane country roads. This does an awful lot of them now, with about 500,000 miles of mapped roadways in North America. Unlike some EVs, the Bolt remains a pretty decent value even if you've loaded it all the way to the gills. The RS trim, which is the top-end trim with all of the options like rain sense wipers, Super Cruise, the optional paint color, the power moonroof, the illuminated charge port, all that jazz, will stop at $40,041. Now, a base Model 3, definitely strong contention to this, $40,130 if you choose a black model with a charger. Technically, the Model 3 is less expensive at $38,630, including the destination charge that undercuts this by, $1,500 or so, top-end trim to base trim Model 3. That's not the worst comparison, mind you, although you could delete Super Cruise and be on a much more even keel there. You actually get a much better car, I think, in the Bolt, and I can't believe I'm saying that exactly, than a base Model 3, the base Model 3. Now obviously, if you have the cash and you want to get one of the upper end trims, you want that extra functionality of full self-driving, you want native access to the Tesla supercharger network, you want rear power bias, you want faster 0 to 60 times, then you're going to want that Model 3. But if you're simply looking for affordable electric transportation that's probably going to be fairly reliable, this is not a bad place to look. And again, you could fully load this for the price of a Model 3 with just an extra paint color and the charger, which you're probably going to want if you're tiptoeing into the electric world. $40,130. Keep that in mind because they have fixed pricing and it varies a lot. Tesla changes their pricing practically on a daily basis. But this does not. And we all know that GM loves a discount. Chevy especially loves a discount. I would not be surprised if after a few months of the Bolt being on sale, you started to see $1,000, $1,500, maybe even 10% off in some trims depending on exactly where you are in the US. So if you're looking for the deal, absolutely hands down, get the Bolt. If on the other hand, you're looking for performance, size, and you're willing to pay for that, then you might want to look elsewhere. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. And is this the kind of EV that America needs more of? I would argue yes, because I like the idea of reduced resource consumption, not just reduced energy consumption, but just making cars a bit smaller and a bit lighter and easier to park. This is under 4,000 pounds of EV. And with a lot of cars getting bigger and heavier every year, it's kind of refreshing to see this. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, it's only going to stick around for a short while. Details are sketchy, but basically, GM needs the room in the factory for something else. So it looks like this is going to last maybe about 2 model years, maybe some extra production on the other side of that. Unless this becomes a runaway success, expect it to not stick around too long. Now, we don't know if there's a plan after that, or if maybe they're going to continue building it somewhere else in the world and try and bring it to the US. But at the moment, you might want to act fast if you really want one. See all of you later.